Welcome to Issues of Contemporary Politics with Dr. Brovkin and Russia under Yeltsin and Putin regime playlist. Today my topic is Russian economy. How large is Russian economy? How well or how poorly it is doing? And what is the effect of the sanctions? These are the questions that I would focus on today. Now, I start with a famous expression under President Obama when he called Russia as a gas station pretending to be a country. And even today, the Western reports on Russian economy are mostly dismissive, mostly saying that it exists only because of oil exports. Mostly it says it's outdated, it's post-Soviet, that it's backward, and so on and so forth. And they basically estimated that the Russian GDP is about 2 trillion US dollars, which is, of course, less than tenth of the United States. And they say, well, Russian economy is like that of Spain or Italy or something like that. So let me dispute that. The way to start, of course, is a very simple example how you calculate what the economy is. It's a sum total of products, commodities, and services. The simple example would suffice that, for example, I bought the house in 2000 for $200,000. Today it's worth $800,000. It's the same house, nothing changed. It's just got 20 years older. In the United States, you would pay about $700 an hour to consult with a lawyer. It's just a consultation with a lawyer, and in Russia you pay 10. But that's the same service, so it's valued extraordinary more. And the last example, in France, you go to the doctor and you pay 30 euros. In the United States, it's 300 at least or more. So you have, for the same service, you have something that's valued 10 times more. So in other words, the sum total of services and goods doesn't make much sense, because in dollar equivalents, it just inflated prices in the United States. And when the United States economy shows $28 trillion, that should be divided by 3 at least, in order to have the equivalent as what you pay for the same services in other countries. So this is where you have the so-called PPP, parity purchase power comparison, and even that is not totally accurate, because it again transfers everything into dollars, and the dollars is varied from year to year, the inflation, but it's much closer. So according to the PPP, World Bank and IMF, Russia today is number 4. So it would be the first is still given to the United States, even though in fact it's probably China. And then the third place is India, and the fourth is Russia. The fourth means that it has surpassed Germany and Japan. And therefore it is the biggest economy in Europe, and it's the fourth largest in the world. Moreover, if you take into account that the United States is 350 million people, China is a billion and a half, India is a billion and a half, and Russia is only 144 million. This means that a country with 144 million is number 4 compared to the other 3 that are double, triple, or 10 times bigger in population. So this is, of course, a remarkable achievement. Now, another very important factor is that if the United States, huge amount or proportion of its GDP is services, Russian economy is commodity production. It is very much based on industrial and agricultural output. So let's just look at the at the most obvious facts. Russia produces in 2024 71 million tons of steel. The United States is given as 81, and the Korea is the same. South Korea 71. So in other words, it's one of the top three producers of steel in the world. If we take oil, the United States is number one, Saudi Arabia number two. Russia is the third largest producer of oil and gas in the world. If we take electricity, it's the same thing. If we take grain production, 2024 was 136 million metric tons of grain and cereals, and Russia is the biggest exporter of cereals, grain and wheat in the world, having beaten the first place that was held by the United States. So Russian economy is very multifaceted. It has energy, it has strong agriculture, and it has a high-tech production, especially in the field of armaments, where in fact it has probably no rivals in the quantity and quality of its military merchandise. And I spoke about that separately, but today I focus on non-military. So on non-military production, the way to explain it is that Russia has a totally different model of development, which in the past used to be called socialist under the Soviet Union, but really there's nothing socialist about it. What I call it is a state-directed and state-run industrialization. This was not even Soviet, not even. The best way to describe it is the state take an active part and a leading role in the industrial projects. It was pretty much similar the way it is in China, and where the state actually runs the show and private enterprise works in ways that the state directs it. And it's the same sort of thing in Russia, when the Tsar ordered to build a railroad, and they just built it. And that was at that time the longest railroad in the world, the Trans-Siberian Railroad in 1890s. So today, it's pretty much the same thing. It's in the Russian tradition. There are this huge state projects that generate a lot of labor force, a lot of workers, a lot of revenue, a lot of taxation, and it's a huge domestic market. Now, I should mention that there are a couple of these very important projects that are going on. Russia is building simultaneously several superhighways that would link St. Petersburg and Moscow. This would be completed pretty soon. And then there's already the construction of a superhighway, several lanes in each direction towards China. And the first part of it would link Moscow, Kazan, Yekaterinburg in the Urals. And then the plan is to continue all the way to China. So again, that would be the longest highway in the world. Now, the same thing they're doing now with railroads. The railroad to China is like one track built under the Soviet system, Soviet regime, in addition to so-called BAM, in addition to the old Trans-Siberian Railroad. And now they're modernizing it, they're electrifying it, they're building new tracks, etc., etc. There's a huge industrial project that are going on at the same time. Also, Russia is building its own quite large maritime fleet, in addition to all kinds of new military vessels and submarines and aircraft and so on. So it's a very, very much domestic market, industrialization based on Soviet industrial basis. So they basically much continue. Now, what is different today is that there is private enterprise and there's very sizable foreign participation. I'll speak to that later when we deal with the effect of sanctions. Now, effect of sanctions. Overall, sanctions did create a lot of problems, especially 22, 23. For example, Western countries withdrew overnight from Russian automobile market and just abandoned those factories, and the car production collapsed. It similar collapsed. BMW went out, and Ford and General Motors and Toyota, they're all left. So they just abandoned and for about half a year or a year, they just didn't know what to do, and it was just idle. Then finally, the Chinese came, and the Russian entrepreneurs came, and the workers who worked there and the engineers, they resumed production. They resumed production, and they started producing new models under different names. And it took them only 2 years, but today Russia has pretty much returned to what it used to be, which is 1.5 million cars per year, which is of course not a whole lot compared to the bigger producers like Volkswagen and Toyota, but it is what it was before the sanctions, and it is a sizable number. Now, the biggest success in terms of the sanctions for Russian recovery, I mean, was agriculture. In 2020, a lot of stuff in Russian supermarkets was imports from Western Europe. Then all of a sudden, bang, it disappeared. And then the Russians discovered this was a blessing in disguise, because Russian agricultural production just skyrocketed the next year. In addition to the fact that Russia had its own tractors and its own fertilizers, it's the biggest producer of fertilizers for the whole world, and it was just astronomical. And it just basically produced more grain than anybody thought was possible, beating its own records and replacing the United States as a number one exporter of grain. I believe the figures are it is 30% of world exports of grain is Russia. And now, if as far as industry is concerned, it was as I said, with cars and things, which with automobiles and with aviation, it was difficult because a lot of contracts were interrupted, and there were parts that were needed for example, airplane engines that were slow in coming. But the blessing in disguise was Russia restored its own aviation industry, and it is now already producing Sukhoi aircraft, which is a mid-size aircraft that is flying already in Russia and in foreign destinations, and it's completely 100% Russian aircraft. And the Russians and Chinese are preparing to launch a competition to Boeing and Airbus. Now, in other words, these are all examples of how these sanctions were overcome in industry. The biggest, of course, effect on of the sanctions was on the financial sector, which was banning of Russia from SWIFT, banning transactions, sanctions for companies that do transactions. But of course, imaginative Putin found out the weight of this too, and this may be a huge blow to Western counterparts. Basically, it's the attempt to create an alternative form of transactions. I will speak to this in a much more detail in the coming videos in connection with BRICS. But just to mention here is that G7 excluded Putin from its own, and instead Putin created BRICS, and BRICS is now preparing its own currency, or at least a system of transactions and payment for this that are not traceable, not punishable, not sanctionable, and are separate from SWIFT. So this already the transactions between Russia and China, Russia and India, Russia and Iran, and several other countries in BRICS that are bypassing the dollar, and that means a very, very significant blow to dollar economy and to the United States. Same thing actually happened with the blow up of Nord Stream 2, which was bringing Russian cheap gas to Germany. Now Germany is falling production. It is pretty much in recession, whereas Russia shows 4% healthy growth as a result of these explosions and ostracism and the banning. By the way, about oil, the Europe does continue to buy Russian oil. It just buys it from India. So Russia sells it to India. India sells it to Europe. Europe gets it for higher price. Indians make a lot of money, but nothing ever changes. The point is, Russia, an economy, is too big to be silenced or to be excluded or to be sanctioned. They always find a way to circumvent the sanctions through the friendly countries, through the Central Asian republics that do big business with Russia, through Turkish companies that do business with Russia, through the labor import from Turkey, Iran, North Korea, China, India, and Russia is shown amazing resilience. And now Putin is trying to create a new world order, a kind of a parallel to IMF and parallel to World Bank, a new financial order that would be independent of Western sanctions. So these are the few considerations that I have. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel about history, about contemporary politics, about war in Ukraine, Soviet experience, and many other topics in my playlists. Thank you. Goodbye.